Hi, this is Watchman Alexander Lawrence. What a day in news, and what an amazing time in history where these signs of the end times are coming at us so fast that we can hardly even keep up. Honestly, I look through the news, and most days there's so much happening that is a portend of the last days of this age that I could hardly even absorb it all. But I wanted to try and just run down some of the things that have happened today or in the last couple of days to give you an idea of what all is going on, because a lot of the times we don't see the big picture. Media in the West is not good at connecting all the dots. It is not telling us what all of this means. We just get inundated with a bunch of stuff that seems, frightening and somewhat disconnected, and we just think, oh, it's a real mess. Well, it is a real mess, but it's all leading to what Jesus called days of Noah, or actually what he said is that the last days will be like the days of Noah. So it's kind of a repeat of what the world was like before the flood. Some of the things that were going on in that time period included transhumanism, widespread violence, world war. Now, at that time, the population wasn't what it is now. I don't think that they were spread all over the globe necessarily. I think the population was smaller and concentrated around what we would now call the Promised Land, or the Levant, and the nations of Israel and Lebanon and Syria and down into Egypt and over into Mesopotamia. I think that was the area of concentration before the flood, but nonetheless, they were doing a lot of things that we're doing now. Yes, they were very advanced, and I will talk about that in detail in one of my Apocrymancer regular episodes. But because they received knowledge from heaven that men were never intended to have, they were able to accomplish things even beyond what we can accomplish in some ways today, although they didn't have the infrastructure that we have today, and they didn't have some of the advanced mechanical capabilities that we have. But they had a type of finesse with their sciences and with their technologies that we don't possess today. We're more of a brute force culture when it comes to accomplishing things in the technological realm. So what back then is like what's going on now? Well, transhumanism was one of the big problems back then. Hybridization. I don't know how much they were doing in terms of mixing man and machine, which is part of transhumanism today, but in terms of genetic engineering and manipulation of DNA, they certainly were engaging in that, according to the ancient scriptures. They were also, at the end at least, extremely violent. There was war and violence everywhere, Genesis tells us. We are coming into a period of extreme violence. Unfortunately, we're on the brink of World War III, and unlike other wars before this, this World War has the capability of taking out an enormous amount of the population of the earth because of the types of weapons that we're using. We have weapons of mass destruction now. The Bible, the book of Revelation, indicates when it speaks of the first four seals being broken in John's vision, we see that a quarter of the earth is killed at that time because of war and the resulting famine and some plague that goes along with that as well. But it's all triggered by war, right? The rider on the red horse is war. What we're about to enter into is that time period of the seals being broken. In fact, I think the first seal has already been broken, but that's another topic altogether. But certainly the second seal is ready to be broken at any time, or maybe already has, and we're ramping up to it. But a quarter of the world's population will be gone as a result of World War III. That's extremely frightening, and yet we're not really grasping that as a whole. There are some people that have woken up to the fact that this is what's coming. We have World War III on our doorstep, but by and large, people just don't get it yet. Even though there have been some significant prophecies from many different people over many decades about what's coming upon us, people are not well educated. They're not listening. They're not paying attention, and they're not getting signals from the Lord because they're just not willing to listen for the most part. And sometimes they're just too busy to listen to what the Lord is trying to tell them. But if we slow down and we seek Him, He will confirm to you. I have every confidence that God will confirm to you if you go to Him in prayer and you ask Him, what is coming upon the world? Should I be concerned? I have every confidence that He will affirm that extremely difficult times are on our doorstep. And He'll do that because He loves us and He wants us to be prepared. And I'm going to talk about how we can be prepared in just a minute, but let me go through some of these news stories first. I was going to talk about the antediluvian world a little bit more, but I think that I will leave off of that because I could really get into that for quite a while. And there were a lot of earth changes that were going on back then. There was a lot of war and violence. The main thing is that men were extremely rebellious against God, and they were mixing types of creatures together. Kinds, actually, is what the Bible calls it. 17 or 18 times, the book of Genesis says that God separated animals into kinds, or it mentions animals in their particular kinds, and it is very clear through that repetition that God never intended for kinds to mix. Kinds are to remain distinct and separate. And yet, in the antediluvian world, because of the arcane knowledge that they received from fallen angels, they were mixing kinds, even human beings with animals, animals with animals. There are ancient texts which suggest that all kinds of combinations were being created at that time. And there are some good reasons why that may have occurred, but I can't get into that now. I will have to touch on that in some future teachings, and I definitely touch on it in my coming book, Leviathan's Ruse. Okay, so what's going on in the news today? First of all, stem cells have now been used to make human egg and sperm cells that can then be turned into a baby. So you could have two men donate stem cells. You could have two men and a woman, because recently there were embryos that were created from 3 parents. Well, now we have the ability to create eggs and sperm from stem cells. So combining the technologies, I can only imagine, and now I didn't see this in an article, but I can only imagine that we can now combine these genetic technologies to be able to produce babies from multiple adult individuals who may be of the same or various genders. And of course, we're making more and more strides in being able to change the genetic structure of the embryo in development so that we get a designer baby. Also today, mice have been grown with enormous brains due to the introduction of human DNA. Super intelligent human mice. Now, it's not a hybrid, half and half type of hybrid, but these mice are getting human DNA that causes their brains to be more advanced, like a human being, and larger. That's pretty scary. And it's even more scary when you look at some of the other hybrid creatures that have already been created, such as cows with human immune systems. I feel like it was only a few weeks ago that I saw an article about cows that have been given human immune systems so that they can be infected with the Ebola virus, and then they'll produce human antibodies to that virus, which can then be extracted from the cows and given to human beings who have contracted the disease to help them to fight it off. Now, that sounds noble, right? Who could ever argue against trying to save someone who has Ebola from dying by using an animal, even if it means the death of the animal, which I don't think it does in this case. I think they're just extracting plasma. But even if it meant the death of an animal or some sort of strange medical procedure to be done on animals so that we can save a human being, for most people, that's a valid approach. That's an okay thing to do because human beings are more valuable. Human beings are made in the image of God. But when you start to create an abomination in order to save human beings, you've crossed into a whole different territory. And the Bible is very clear that any sort of mixing of kinds is an abomination to God. There are few things that are more dangerous to our society than mixing kinds, because God destroyed the world. First and foremost, because of corruption, because of genetic corruption. That genetic corruption also came yoked with moral corruption. They work in concert. Okay, but a lot of times when we read Genesis, we think, oh, well, the earth was full of violence and every thought of men was evil all the time, and that's why God destroyed the world. Well, yes, the thoughts were evil all the time. That's why they were willing to engage in things like mixing of kinds, like this kind of hybridization. And they were very violent because they were immoral in every way. But we also see in Genesis that Noah was considered perfect in his generations. He was not morally perfect. He was considered, and go look back at the Hebrew, and you will find that the word that's used to describe Noah is the same word that's used to describe the lambs that were slaughtered in Israel as a sacrifice for guilt or sin offerings. So the word that is used for those lambs is blemishless. The lamb had to be blemishless without any kind of defect in order for it to be a valid sacrifice. The same word is used of Noah, and it becomes much more clear when we bring in some of the extra biblical texts like 1st Enoch, that Noah and his family were the only ones that were not genetically corrupted. They were purely human, 100% human, whereas everyone else in the world, to some degree or other, had corrupted their DNA, and probably for very good reason, which I can't get into right now. But we're coming into that time when science is telling us that there are some great reasons to be modifying our DNA. We can evolve. We can become more than we are now if we'll just cross ourselves with animals, or tweak DNA in a lab in some way in some form that we've never seen before in the natural world. I don't know if that'll ever happen or not, but it's at least a possibility. So it's very frightening for me to see us going down this path. And yes, human-animal hybrids that are 50-50 have been created, but the embryos have supposedly been destroyed very early on because of the kind of laws that we have in place now against growing hybrid creatures. But that was a couple years ago now that a bunch of, I think like 200 chimeras or these mixes were created in a lab and then destroyed. So we can do it. We have the capability. And just like with the atomic bomb, anything that we can do, we will do. If we have the capability, whether it's wise or not, or look at CERN. CERN has the potential, the scientists themselves have said, the physicists have said, there is a potential for CERN to create a black hole or some kind of rip in space-time that could destroy the whole world or potentially the whole universe if there's a cascade. Now, that won't happen because we know from God's prophetic books that that's not how the world ends. But the scientists are concerned about that possibility. And yet, we're going about doing this anyway. So that's part of the stupidity of humankind, unfortunately, is that when we, fallen humankind, I should say, is that when we have the capability of doing something, we do it, whether it's good or not, whether it's going to be beneficial in the long run or not. We're very short-sighted and we're very stubborn and stiff-necked about these kinds of things. So we will do it, and we have capability now. When this gets widespread, and especially when we start seeing human beings, regular human beings wanting to either give their kids an advantage or to even have their own code change so that they develop new capabilities that they didn't have before. When we see that happen, and it is so close, we are in the days of Noah, as Jesus said, and those are the last days. I mean, it won't be very long. In fact, the Lord said that he will cut short the last days, because if he didn't, no flesh would survive. Human beings would not make it. We would destroy ourselves with these technologies. So he has to cut short these days and come back before too much time elapses. Otherwise, we're toast. How do you like that? What else is going on? Well, today, Russia paraded a fake nuclear missile around, now I can't, let me look at this because I can't remember where it was that they were doing this. It was their Army Day, and on the streets, and I don't know if this was in Moscow or what city this was being reported from. I'm trying to look it up right now, but I don't see it. But they paraded this missile around, and on the side of it, it reads, "To be personally delivered to Obama." Now, this isn't a real missile. It was fake, but the message is abundantly clear. And Russia has been more and more set against the West because of everything that's happened in Ukraine and other reasons, things that are going on in the Middle East and in China and Korea. They are aligned against us. Now, and here's another thing that British top NATO commander today warned that current tensions with Russia represent an existential threat to our whole being and could very well escalate into all-out war. And he's not wrong. This will escalate into a nuclear exchange. I know that's scary. I know nobody wants to consider that possibility, right? We would much rather rest easy and not think that we might be hit with an atomic or nuclear weapon or multiple nuclear weapons, which is actually what's going to happen according to prophecies that have been given. But everything is aligning to this. And the reason that I believe so strongly that Russia and probably China along with them will attack us with nuclear weapons is that there have been multiple prophecies given by men of God over the last several decades, for almost 100 years, going back almost that far. We have had prophecies that have spoken to us of destruction by ICBMs and other types of attack. That most of the visions also include something like a electromagnetic pulse, or maybe a cyber attack that shuts down our electric grid. Of course, the people that were seeing these things didn't really understand what they were, by and large. The idea of an EMP hasn't been around for very long, but we know what that is now. And I would encourage you to go look into some of these things, but I am going to be compiling a teaching about all the different prophecies related to the destruction of America at the hands of foreigners. And it's quite a few. It's quite a few. And these are coming from people who are well-respected, men like Dmitry Duduman, men that it cannot be argued are nutcases or don't know their Lord. They're very much in touch with God. And that's why they were given these prophecies, so that they could be faithful to share them with us, and they have done that. And there have been many more prophecies by lesser-known people in recent history. Some of them, we need to take all these things with a grain of salt. Some of them are probably from people's imaginations or dreams that don't mean anything, that weren't from God necessarily. But when you have many, many people of all walks of life having similar types of dreams, we need to pay attention to that, because the word does say that in the end, that people would be getting dreams and visions. God would be sending people these kinds of wake-up calls because we need them. And that's what we're starting to see. So we're on the brink of World War III, not only because of Russia, but also because of North Korea. They've been holding missile and artillery live firing drills. They've been threatening the West. They've been threatening South Korea. They're a real wild card. Iran is a huge problem, and we're trying to deal with it diplomatically, and we will not find a solution diplomatically. They're playing us. Anybody with 2 cents to rub together should be able to identify the fact that was a weird idiom that I used. I don't know why I just used that idiom. That didn't really fit at all. Anyway, anybody with any sense should be able to see that Iran is just biding its time, and in the background, yeah, they're probably showing the UN nuclear scientists or the commission that there's nothing to be worried about, that their development of fissile material is simply for peaceful purposes and energy production. But behind the scenes, you can bet on it, because the Israeli, what am I trying to say? The intelligence community, especially the Israelis, who of course have their finger on the pulse of Iran because they're highly concerned about what Iran will do to them. They are very confident that Iran has developed nuclear warheads, and they now have the missile technology to be able to deliver those warheads. So this diplomatic solution that we're pursuing, it really, first of all, it's lame because we're not requiring enough of them, but also it's just giving them more time to prepare what they want to prepare. And they've called us the greater Satan and Israel the lesser Satan, or maybe it's the other way around, but they've called us basically the adversary, the enemy, and they intend to destroy us as soon as they can. Okay, China and Taiwan are in great tension, and we're in talks with China over Taiwan, but it's a very iffy situation there. Ukrainian high-ranking diplomats are claiming that Kiev is preparing for a full-scale war. Well, how is NATO going to respond to that? According to some past agreements, they should be stepping in and fighting Russia if that occurs. So there's a lot of things going on. Oh yeah, and Hezbollah and Iran are moving on the Golan Heights. So everywhere we look, and of course with ISIS just spreading throughout the Middle East, that's a whole another barrel of monkeys. But everywhere we look, there's incredible tensions, and we're really on the precipice of a full-scale world war. Recently, there was a terrorist threat to the Mall of America. We have terrorists supposedly in the United States now ready to carry out large attacks against major landmarks. And I have no reason to doubt that they can do that. We've already seen from photos that ISIS has taken in front of the White House that they are here, and that they are capable, to some degree at least, of striking at our major landmarks and government buildings. So it would be foolish of us to think that they can't make an attack against something like the Mall of America. I don't know if it'll be that one in particular, but it is interesting that not too long ago, and I wish I could tell you who it was that had this dream, but I don't remember, and I'll have to try and look it up and post it on Facebook or on Twitter. But someone had a dream about a mall in America being bombed, a big mall. And I'm wondering if maybe what they were seeing is the Mall of America being destroyed by ISIS. And this really shouldn't surprise us that we have terrorists among us now because first of all, our borders have never been totally locked down. We've always been porous to some degree. But recently, we're really wide open. More than 20,000 people have crossed the border, the southern border, just since January the 1st. 20,000 people. Border Patrol has their hands full dealing with this influx of immigrants and trying to take care of them all and process them. They can't secure our border and make sure that terrorists don't get through amongst these immigrants from Latin America. They just can't. It's not possible. So certainly, if terrorists had wanted to come across that way, they could have done it. They would have figured out a way to do it. Not very long ago, maybe, I don't know, a year, maybe a year and a half tops, a huge crater formed in Siberia, a massive sinkhole. And it formed at a place called the end of the world. I don't know the name in Russian, but in English, it translates to the end of the world. And this gigantic crater goes straight down into the earth for many meters. In fact, there's and it's huge. There's a picture of helicopters hovering above this thing, and they're kind of dwarfed by the size of this crater. Since then, 6 other craters, several of these, or a few of these, have just formed recently, but 7 craters have now been found in the Arctic area. These are sinkholes where the earth just drops. And this has been happening all around the world. Now, most places they've been smaller, thankfully. But occasionally they do just swallow up a small building. A lot of times cars have dropped into these things. I think in Korea, I think I saw something about South Korea, part of a subway sunk down very suddenly and a couple of people dropped down into it. There's something happening to the crust of the earth or under the crust of the earth that's affecting it. And it's causing a weakening of the structure. And so these sinkholes are, they could pop up anywhere. And there's been more and more of these things around the world. And it made me wonder today when I saw a report of the ones in Siberia, will a huge crater swallow up the army that Satan sends at the believers who are taken to dwell in the desert in the last days? If you look in the book of Revelation, I think chapter 12, Satan spews water, a torrent of water at the messianic believers who have been taken into the desert by the wings of a great eagle, and they're being sheltered there. Now, when this happens, is a matter of debate, but at some point in the last days, there will be a group of believers extracted from, I believe it'll be from Israel, but that's debated as well. But a group of believers will be taken into the desert, and this torrent of water is not literal water as far as I can ascertain. The water stands for Gentile people. Why do I say that? Well, other places in Revelation and even in some of the other books of the Bible, but especially we have it made very clear in Revelation that water is a symbol for the peoples, just the masses of specifically Gentile people. That's why the woman who rides the beast sits on the waters, not only the 7 hills that she's on, but she sits on many waters. Okay, that's all of the nations, all the people of the nations are under her influence. So this river that Satan spews into the desert, I believe, is an army. It's a huge army. Now, the verse says that the earth opens up and swallows or consumes this torrent of water to protect those people that are in the desert. And then Satan is furious and he goes off to wage war against other believers. But it just made me think, looking at these craters, there was a time in the days of Moses when the earth opened up and swallowed a bunch of rebellious Israelites. I wonder if something like that will happen, but it'll just be an enormous sinkhole, bigger than the one that we see in Siberia, and it's going to occur right under the feet of this advancing army, and they'll just be decimated as a result of this dropping into the earth, and who knows what happens to them down there. Maybe just the fall kills them, but it's an interesting theory, at least. Obviously, purely conjecture. But it is telling to me that all of these sinkholes are opening up. And as well, we have strange sounds happening around the world. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but if you want to go look up strange noises or booming sounds, some people call them skyquakes. That's a really interesting area of study because it seems to happen randomly all over the place, and it's not a phenomenon that has ever been experienced before. This is totally new in the history of the world as far as we know. These sustained sounds that don't seem to be coming from anywhere in particular, they're very disconcerting for people. These are signs to us. I could go on and on with this stuff, but I think I just hit like the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to try and wrap it up, and I'm going to ask this question: how should we respond to these things? What do we do? What can we do? It seems like this is too much to even to absorb and to understand what's going on a daily basis. Like, what can we do other than just put blinders on and go about our life as we always have and hope nothing bad happens to us? Let me give you a couple suggestions. First of all, pray more. Pray specifically for guidance and for protection. Pray that God will put you where He wants you and put you in a place that you can be taken care of and that you can do good in these times, these increasingly difficult times. Second of all, prepare physically. Now, I know a lot of people have a bad idea about preppers, and there have been some shows on television which have, sort of focused on people that are a little nuts, a little wacky, and they've given the whole prepper movement a bad name. And certainly there are some people that go way overboard and that are just living in anxiety, and we're not supposed to be like that. The Bible is very clear. Our Lord zeroed in on this on a number of occasions and said, don't worry, don't be anxious. But that doesn't mean don't prepare. You can make preparations and you can do things to secure your future without being worried or anxious about what's going to happen, and without focusing so much on the future that you're not any good today. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. I have prepared by putting together a bug out bag. My wife and I have bug out bags, and we have equipment that we need for surviving in the case that we have to, in the scenario that we have to just get up and leave quickly. We live on the East Coast, and that's a dangerous place to be, because if Russia and or China do attack us, and I certainly believe that they will, or if what I think is going to come first happens, which is rioting as a result of an economic crash, which I believe is coming in September of this year, or at least it's going to start in September, right at the end of the Jewish Shemitah and the beginning of the new Jewish year, which they call Rosh Hashanah. But that is the time frame based on the pattern that Jonathan Cahn has identified, and based on a couple of other things, some prophecies and some just stuff I can't get into right now. But the pattern looks to be pointing to also the economic world has been shaky, and a lot of people have been concerned based purely on the performance of our economy and the world's just the shift in the world monetary system. It's not good for us that Russia, for instance, has recently gotten off the petrodollar, and there are a number of nations that want to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And those are concerning, but we in America in particular, we have some real issues related to debt and the way that Wall Street is running, and a bunch of stuff that I don't have time to talk about right now. But it looks to me like the economy will crash first, and you're going to have widespread rioting, and then we're going to have martial law put into effect. Well, listen, I don't want to be anywhere near a major city if that happens. You do not want to be in an urban area. That is just asking for trouble. So whether it's rioting or an attack from an enemy, I don't want to be in the major population centers. So it's important that I be ready to just get up on a moment's notice and get out of here. And I can do that because I have my equipment put together already. I have everything I need to survive, and I can just throw it in the car, and I have bikes, that we can use if the driving is not possible. We've even got saddles. We've got a rack that goes on the bike, each bike, and the saddles that hang off of those so that we can carry, food and water. There are some ways that you can be creative to prepare yourself, even if you don't have a lot of money. Because trust me, we don't have a lot of money. We're doing this a little bit at a time. And we've had to make some sacrifices in certain areas. We can't, just buy things that we would normally buy, because we need to be making purchases that are going to be useful for survival. Also, you need to identify where to go. Have a place, or what they call a bug out location, a place that you can go to in the scenario of some sort of widespread chaos. You may want to have extra gasoline. Okay, we have several tanks of gasoline, and we put stabilizer in those so that they'll last for, I think it's up to a year before it starts to break down. Make sure if you're going to be storing gas long term that you get some sort of a stabilizer to put in it. Otherwise, it'll go bad. But you can do that. You can store it for, and right now, gas prices are pretty low, not as low as they were, but this is a good time to take advantage of that and fill up some tanks. What I'm telling you is just have a plan. Don't let life just happen to you, okay? Yes, we have to depend on God every step of the way, because anything can go wrong. Anything can happen. And if we're not relying on God, then we really have no hope, regardless of whether or not we've prepared. There are a lot of people who think that, mostly unbelievers, but there are people who believe that because they have a lot of weapons and ammunition and all kinds of supplies that they've stocked up for themselves, that they can survive an apocalyptic scenario. I'm sorry, but there are too many variables. There are too many unknowns, and crazy things can and will happen. I don't care how much you've prepared. I don't care how many guns you have. You're not going to be able to defend yourself in certain situations. And there are actually groups of people who have already said that they will go after the preppers. They're not going to prep themselves. They'll just go after the preppers and destroy them and take all of their supplies if and when that day comes that they need to survive. Wow. Think about that. If you're one of these uber preppers who has, built up a sort of fortress for yourself, and you think that you're going to be able to defend it from the world at large, there are people who have already said that they're intent on coming and taking it from you. And trust me, there'll be a lot of them. There will be a lot of people. If our infrastructure crashes, or if somebody comes in and destroys our infrastructure for us, it will not take very long for people to get desperate and wild and act like animals. And they will band together in huge mobs, and they will go after resources and supplies wherever they can find them. This is just human nature. This is just mob mentality. It will happen. I know it's not pleasant to think about, but we've seen it over and over again throughout history. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out how human beings behave in life and death scenarios, in chaotic situations that last, for days, weeks, or months. And the longer it goes, the more desperate people will get and the worse they will behave. So we need to rely on God, or else we really have no hope. But we need to also be prepared, because God will use the preparations that you do now to help you in the time of need. That may seem like in a way, it's a dichotomy, because I'm saying have faith, believe that God will take care of you, but at the same time, you need to do some things to take care of yourself. I'm not negating faith by saying that. And the reason that I can say that with confidence, first of all, is experience. But, everybody knows this instinctually. Yes, God feeds the birds, but they have to get out of the nest and go find the worm and pick it up and eat it, right? It doesn't just drop to them in their nest. They have to work for it. They go out and use the body and the abilities that God has given them to get the food. But God has created food in the world for them, things that they can eat that are out there, and He will, lead them to it. They just have to cooperate. So we need to cooperate, and we have a confirmation of this in several places in Scripture. One big one is in the book of Genesis, where we read about Joseph gaining the favor of Pharaoh because he interprets his dreams, and then he tells the Egyptians that they need to prepare for the 7 years of famine that are coming. The dream was a warning. Joseph understood that it was a warning, and he acted in accordance with that. He told the officials, we have to prepare and be ready to make it through 7 years of famine. And they listened to him. So God honored that commitment, and He provided them all of the food that they would need to get through 7 years and then some, so that they could help other people. Part of the reason that I say to prepare now and stockpile as many supplies as you can is not just so you can survive, but so that you can help other people who aren't prepared. That's a huge blessing for us. We can store up treasures in heaven by being prepared to help other people in time of need. Also, look at what happened in the life of Jesus' family. Joseph and Mary were very poor, but because of their faith and their obedience, God brought wise men, magi, from the east, bearing gifts, very, very valuable gifts. I believe Daniel was the one who told them to do this, and who trained them when he was in Babylon. He was a high official, and he prepared them for this day to bring these things to the king that had just been born. And so they came and they gave these very expensive spices to the family of Jesus. And they needed that because they didn't have the resources themselves to be able to hightail it to Egypt when Herod was trying to kill all of the children. So God prepared that specially so that they would be able to sell those spices and those gifts that had been given to them in order to have the money to go down to Egypt and survive there for a time until it was safe to return to Israel. So God will make a way if you are obedient and if you will respond to his leading in this. And I believe that he will. If you ask him, I believe that he will tell you, yes, you need to prepare. Yes, you need to take these things seriously. Judgment is coming. Then he will, even if you're poor, even if it feels like, what can I do, especially this late in the game, there's still time. There is still time. You may not be able to do as much as some people, but God will make something happen for you so that you will have at least a minimum of resources that you're going to need when everything hits the fan. So again, please take this to God. Okay? Don't listen to me just because I'm telling you to do something. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things. Take it to the Lord and be diligent to seek his guidance and his mind on this matter. And I promise you, he won't let you down. Okay? He's not going to say, no, you don't really need to do anything. And then the time comes when you're in major trouble and you've got nothing. Okay? God is not going to tell you wrong. So please go ask him and do what he says. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Shalom.